So today is a free training all about the most important steps to find your career path that honestly I was never given. So it took me, you'll find out, I'll tell you my story. You'll find out that it took me quite a long time to figure this all out. And I'm going to tell you why it's important. And at the end, I'm going to talk about a course that I have that's starting up that will help you implement the steps if you need help doing so. Okay, so I hit, everyone should be muted. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. And I just want to talk about what this presentation is for and who the course is for. But it's basically for people who are interested in wildlife biology and related careers. So I say wildlife biology a lot, but this really applies to ecology, zoology, conservation biology. My background is actually in biological sciences, and you don't have any idea how you want to go about that path. A lot of people just say they want to be a biologist, but they really don't know what's involved. Or you're in a degree program, but maybe you're not sure if you're making the right choices. So if you've tried to search your answers online, I've actually tried doing this, not to answer questions myself, but to see what's out there. And a lot of it's really confusing. It's hard to find your answers. I'm part of two different Facebook groups. A lot of people post open-ended questions there. Or if you're asking your professors and they're not quite giving you the answers you want. And then also if you're unsure if you have what it takes to become a wildlife biologist. Some people are intimidated by this field. So what we're going to go over today is the main takeaway of this whole webinar is that it is so important to look at the job markets now, really for the jobs that you want in the future, so you can understand what your job options are. And we'll talk about why that's important. I'm going to give you a tool so you can start tracking jobs on your own and learn how to see if they are a good fit for you. Learn what makes people competitive jobs and how you can get that competitive edge. And then what else you need to consider in your career so that you'll be happy. This is something that, like, seriously, nobody talks about. They just assume everyone is going to be happy in wildlife biology, and it's not a one fits all type of package. So let me tell you about myself. If you've read my book, I'm sorry, this is a little bit redundant, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And this story is really important because it's why I'm so passionate about doing this stuff. And I'll talk about that at the end of my story. But this is a more abbreviated story. If you want more detail, you can definitely get my book, Getting a Job in Wildlife Biology. But in a nutshell, I grew up loving animals, loving nature. I had two parents who were not outdoorsy at all. So we did do nature stuff, but it usually was in our front yard. This was a state park that we would visit. We actually would never camp because my mom was not comfortable camping. So that's another reason why I call myself the fancy scientist, because I'm not a traditional wildlife biologist. And how I discovered wildlife biology was that I was actually encouraged to go on a study abroad program by my brother, just randomly, not even a wildlife program. And at the time, I was actually interested in acting. So I was dual majoring in theater and biology. And biology was my backup career in case theater didn't work out. I thought I could always be a medical doctor because that was a pretty financially stable career that my parents respected. So that was the plan. But then when I decided to study abroad, it all changed because I found this amazing brochure for the School for Field Studies in Kenya. So I decided to go on this program. And I seriously decided to do this just because I thought it looked like a really cool experience. Like I mentioned, I had always loved animals. I always loved nature. And I just thought, when could I ever go to Kenya again? Here in the United States, we tend to think of going to Africa as really scary. whenever I would travel there, people would always say, I'm worried. Am I concerned? So I just never thought it would be an option in the future. And this was in a study abroad program. So it seemed very safe and very protective. I would be with a bunch of other students. And before this, I didn't even know you could have a job in wildlife biology, to tell you the truth. I only knew about Jane Goodall, and I knew I didn't have what it took to be like Jane Goodall, because she lived in very remote field conditions. They didn't have electricity. She was by herself a lot of the time. So here I discovered that you could have a job in wildlife biology. And ironically, it could be in the United States. So it took me all the way from Africa to decide that, or to determine that. So once I got back from the School for Field Studies, this was my last year in an undergraduate at the University of Buffalo. I graduated with my biology degree, which I was already majoring in. And then after that, I knew I needed experience. So I don't know if you guys can hear that. Of course, my dog is being bad right now. So I knew I needed experience. So I decided to participate in different internships to get some experience. So I took some time off, and I took 3 different jobs slash internships. The first one was for the School for, or not the School for Field Studies, sorry, the Bureau of Land Management in St. George, Utah. We worked in northern Arizona near the Grand Canyon, and I got some telemetry experience, a lot of experience making maps and working with GIS and GPS. In 2004, I was at Disney's Animal Kingdom. And there I worked in an endocrine lab. So it was awesome working at Disney World. A lot of people think that I was working in the park, but I was actually in the lab. So my dog just got into the laundry room. I will be back. I am so sorry. Just give me 1 second. I'll try to show you at the end. So I was at Disney World, and I learned all about captive animal management and endocrine work. I also worked with a wildlife biologist there. We studied some animal populations on Disneyland that was undeveloped. And then in 2005, I went back to Kenya, and I worked with the School for Field Studies, the same program that I was initially a part of. And I was an intern there for a year. So honestly, I mostly helped run the program, but I was able to collaborate with a wildlife management professor there and co-author 2 publications with him. So that was a really great experience. And I lived in Kenya for a year. So that was just a really amazing experience for somebody who wants to become a wildlife biologist. And I especially loved African wildlife. So during 2004, 2005, I was figuring out my next steps. I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but I never was quite 100% sure what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to do something in conservation. I was thinking more nonprofit, more government jobs, but I again I had no idea what I wanted to do for research. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to get my master's or PhD. And I ended up contacting someone and eventually accepting the decision to join their lab in 2006 at the University of Missouri. And my advisor was a geneticist. She had some research experience on forest elephants. So these are different species of elephant in Africa. And at the time, they were considered the same species as savanna elephants. So I was allowed to study whatever I wanted as long as it involved genetics and I could get funding for it. And I decided to study the social structure of African forest elephants. Now, I absolutely loved my dissertation research. It was amazing. It was difficult, but it was an amazing experience. I collected their dung for genetics and I observed elephants in the field, trying to figure out their social networks and then comparing them to what is seen in the other elephant species. So I did this until 2012 when I graduated in December 2012. And then I didn't have a postdoc position lined up, or a job lined up, but luckily, one of my committee members had some leftover funding from another grant, and I was able to, Gus, stop it. And I was able to carry out some of this research. So this was a very interesting study, very weird study, but we were looking at disgust in mammals. So for this research, I started working with camera traps, and we put out found animal carcasses from the road and watched responses, and the responses were targeted towards raccoons. Anyways, it was a very funny study. So at this time, I started applying for jobs, and I was applying just for like all different types of jobs. So a lot of nonprofit jobs, a lot of government jobs, and I was getting like nothing. I really, really didn't want to take another postdoc because postdocs are temporary positions. For if you don't know that, they usually last like a year to 2 years. But that I did apply for some postdocs, ones that I really wanted or ones I was really interested in. But I was not super excited about taking them because I really just wanted I was done moving. I was sick of traveling. I just wanted to move and be finished and start a job. But I wasn't getting any interviews for any permanent jobs. I only had 4 interviews total, and 3 of them were for postdocs. And the one that was a job, I ultimately didn't get. I was their number 2 candidate. But luckily, before that, I decided that I wanted to take this mammal postdoc. So this is in Raleigh, North Carolina, at the Museum of Natural Sciences. And I loved this postdoc. And this was actually a long postdoc. It was really strange. It's really strange and unusual to have a postdoc that lasts longer than 3 years. And this one was about 5. And then I actually got it extended a little bit longer. And I loved this postdoc so much that when I was applying for jobs, I really heavily weighted if I wanted that job because I was getting such great experience working at the museum. So I was very selective about the jobs that I applied for. And I really wanted to stay in Raleigh. So I mostly applied for jobs there. And I can't remember how many jobs I applied for, but somewhere between like 15 and 20, I believe. And I did a good job getting interviews, but I really couldn't believe how hard it was to secure these jobs. I really was shocked. And I don't mean to brag about myself. I don't mean it in that way, but there were so many times where I applied for a job and I met the qualifications like so perfectly, and then still they found somebody who had more qualifications than me or was more perfect in a slight way, or like they had a competitive edge. So for example, at the museum, my dream job opened up of being the assistant director of the museum, and I was their number 2 choice. The first person, or the person who got the job, she had 10 years of experience on me. So the person before her was more at my career stage, a young professional. But with somebody who has 10 years of experience, they have more publications, they have more grant experience, or way more grant money. So it was very, very tough competition. So that's how all of my interviews were. And I just was really shocked by this. And I was also shocked that I applied for jobs and didn't even receive an interview. So, for example, at the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, the state agency here, I applied for a mammologist position and I didn't even get an interview for that. And I was just like, this is crazy. I have a PhD. How could I not get an interview for that? But I didn't have the right kind of experience. And what I found over and over again is that the people who got the jobs had the most specific experience for that job. So actually on this last webinar I did for this, the person who got that job, she was on it and she told me that I was right on the mark for why I didn't get that job. Because the job specifically asked for red wolf experience and that's what she had. I also had a PhD, and that can overqualify you for positions. So I really wasn't aware of this when I was in my degree program. So that was my second experience of being on the job market. And basically, even though in my degree I was told that I could adapt my PhD to different types of jobs, that it showed that I was a problem solver, that as long as I could apply the skills to different things, I was okay. But it really wasn't like that in reality. I found it very hard, or despite my best efforts to try to convince people that I really wanted a job that only required a master's degree, or that my skills could be applied in this area, but weren't necessarily directly um, on the same thing. It just didn't work. That's what I found out from my experience. So I think years ago that you could get a degree and apply for all these different types of jobs, but that is not the case for today. Another thing that I found out is that my PhD trained me for a job with very few positions available. So really people saw me as a geneticist or as an elephant biologist. And for elephant jobs, really they're internationally, and I know that sounds kind of a no-brainer hearing me say that because elephants live abroad, but I always assumed that there would be zoo jobs and yeah, I guess really mostly zoo jobs, or I assumed with the nonprofit jobs that I could like be based in the United States and travel abroad for research. But it really isn't like that. And I didn't want to go into academia. I didn't like academia. And that's really the best job, or the most widely available job for somebody who had my experience. So there are zoo jobs, but it's just there's not very many of them at all. And especially if you're trying to just stay in the same city. And the transitions are not easy. I was lucky I was able to transition to camera trap work, but like I said, you are pigeonholed. People saw me as an elephant biologist or a geneticist. I didn't love genetics, so I wasn't excited about jobs continuing in that area. And as I mentioned, overqualification is real. If you go too far in your education, you could become less competitive for jobs, ironically. So I think a lot of people think when I tell them the story that that I wish I'd done things differently, and I do in terms of if I wanted those jobs that I thought I wanted. But going through my PhD, going through the postdocs in the museum, I realized I really love science communication. So that's what I'm focusing on now with the Fancy Scientist podcast. In addition, helping all of you with wildlife biology advice, because that's what people really approach me about the most. But I've always was interested in conservation, and working at the museum, our programs involved kids, our research involved kids. And I just realized doing some social science research that conservation is really all about people, which again, I know sounds like a no-brainer, but for my study species, forest elephants, they're endangered. And no matter how much I could study the science of forest elephants, there was no point if they're being poached. If that species is going to go extinct, what is the science going to do? It's really, you have to stop the human behavior of poaching, and that involves science, definitely, but it's a different type of science. But yeah, if you leave the forest elephants alone, they'll be fine in terms of conservation. They in Central Africa, they really have a lot of habitat in much of their range. It's really about the poaching. So I'm very happy with what I'm doing now, but I'm frustrated because my mentors didn't train me for the jobs that I really wanted. And I don't necessarily blame them. I don't necessarily think they were like malicious or anything. I just think that the field has changed so much in the past few years. I think that the market is so saturated that employers can just get their pick of the litter when people apply for jobs. And I think that the experiences that they went through no longer apply. So, for example, I did apply for some faculty jobs, even though I didn't really want to go into academia. Um, but I didn't get any interviews. So I applied to a couple, I think maybe 3 or 4. And and this is not just me too. It wasn't me who just had a hard time finding a job. My friends in my same cohort had the same problem. And my friend and I, we applied for the same job, and both of us had like between 15 to 20 publications, and we didn't even get an interview for the job. And meanwhile, a professor we knew at our local university, he's not even that old in his career, and when he got his job, he only had one research publication. So it's just really that the standards have changed, and the advice has not kept up with the job market, in my experience. So, and it wasn't because of a lack of experience. I should actually mention too, my mentors, I'm not just talking about my advisor. I asked a lot of people. So anytime we had a seminar speaker at the University of Missouri, so we had people from all different fields, from the government, from nonprofits, and I just felt that their advice was the same, that my PhD could translate, and again, I just found out that it really didn't. So I had all this experience. I'm very proud of all of the things that I did, but it didn't help me for the jobs that I wanted. And actually, when I looked at some jobs, like when I looked at nonprofit jobs, by far most of these jobs are in fundraising and development and things like that. So I just wish somebody had had a conversation with me about those things, but I don't think they knew that. So that's what I'm doing for you guys. I want to give you this insight so you can make better decisions. So it wasn't about experience, it was about having the right experience. And because of this, I developed these 7 steps, which I'm going to tell you today. They're pretty simple, pretty intuitive. So the first one is to study the job market. And when I say study the job market, I mean study the jobs that you ultimately want. So yes, you're going to look at internships and field assistant positions and stuff like that to get your next step job. But ultimately, you want to have an idea of where you want to be 10, 20 years from now and what it takes to get that job. So I wish I had looked at those jobs. I always sort of thought, I'll figure it out when I graduate, and I'll know what jobs I like and I know what jobs I don't like, but I don't know exactly what I want to do. And that was true. I did find jobs that I really liked and that I obviously didn't like and didn't apply to, but they were all over the place. And I had experience for all those different jobs, but because my experiences were all over the place too, I was good at getting interviews and getting to that step, but I wasn't enough to get that job. So I created this job tracker. It's just a spreadsheet on Google, and you can copy and paste it. And I just highly recommend using it to start looking at the jobs you want now. Some of these job postings are incredibly tedious, incredibly long. So I divided it up into sections so that you can get a sense of what these jobs require in terms of experience, in terms of education, things you might not even think of, like grant writing experience, publications. And so it's going to take some time to do this, but I really believe it's important. And like I said, this is free. You can download it right now. You can start doing it. And I honestly would do it maybe once a week, maybe once a month. You can just subscribe to the job alerts. I think almost all of them have alerts now, and you can subscribe, and as the alerts come in your inbox, you can add them to your job tracker if it interests you. And then I have a blog post, the best websites for wildlife biology jobs. So I have a big list of all the ones that I recommend.